On-site safety operations present special hazards and require careful planning and proper work practices. In this training program, we want to review some of the key points for continuous site safety. The first key is to use all available engineering controls to eliminate or reduce site accidents. Next, safe work practices must be encouraged and implemented to eliminate or reduce site accidents. And the use of personal protective equipment is particularly important when engineering controls and safe work practices are unavailable. For a better understanding of accidents and their causes, let's look at two words to describe a safety posture, or things you should do to help prevent accidents. They are classified as offensive and defensive safety postures. Just as in any game, there's an offense and a defense. In the safety business, offense means you are aware of potential hazards, and you take the necessary steps to avoid exposure or an injury. You're following safety rules, regulations, and procedures. You're taking the offense to prevent accidents and injuries. Defensively means you are very aware of situations and conditions that others may create. You're defending yourself from the actions of others, and this is accomplished by being aware of what's going on around you. Preventing accidents and injuries is a result of recognizing and eliminating unsafe conditions and acts. An unsafe condition can also be described as a physical hazard. It could be a wet floor, broken equipment, or other hazard. An unsafe act is something an individual does or fails to do, such as not wearing eye protection when it's required, or wearing your hard hat backwards. It could be wearing a respirator that doesn't properly fit. Most accidents and injuries are a result of unsafe acts. In fact, about 85 to 98% of all injuries are caused as a result of an unsafe act. If you trip and fall, it may be you tripped on the bottom of a door or step, but the cause of the accident wasn't the door or step. It was because that person wasn't paying attention to where he was walking. We call this a dual cause of an accident. The door, which could be classified as a physical hazard, and the unsafe act of the person by not watching where he was walking. At waste sites and during emergency response, we can classify two types of hazards, physical and chemical. Let's now take a look at 6 basic physical hazards, because physical hazards are more prevalent on waste sites. First, there is kinetic mechanical hazards. The slip, trip, and fall type of injury can be classified as kinetic mechanical. When using equipment, if you're struck by an object or moving part, this too is kinetic mechanical. Next, there are thermal hazards that include fires, explosions, hot environments, and thermal hazards can also be hazards created by cold weather or cold temperature chemicals. Electrical hazards generally exist at hazardous waste sites and emergencies. These include overhead power lines, cables, downed electrical lines, buried cable, and others. Any electrical tool used on site can be hazardous if your hands or the tools become wet with perspiration or any type of liquids. Noise can be a physical hazard because unexpected noise or even the operation of heavy equipment can damage your hearing. Biological hazards include poisonous plants and animals or disease-producing organisms. Anything that is contaminated with human blood or blood products is a biological hazard. One method of reducing this hazard is to make sure everything is properly labeled. Radiological hazards include ionizing and non-ionizing radiation. Again, proper labeling reduces the chance of exposure. One of the most important considerations at a hazardous waste site or emergency response situation is engineering controls. These are controls used to reduce physical hazards. A good example is a fixed ladder on a tank, which is enclosed by a safety cage. Another example is using a crane to handle hazardous waste rather than an individual or group of people. A powered platform is an engineering control, as it keeps the operator out of harm's way while performing work. There will be many instances where engineering controls are not feasible, So the next best thing is to have good safe work practices and personal protective equipment. The need for an organized material hazards work team depends on the nature and hazards at the facility. Adequate team training and direction must comply with OSHA's 1910.120. Let's take a look at the basic requirements. First, as in any type of safety program, there must be strong management commitment. Included in this category is a disciplinary program to ensure that all employees follow appropriate procedures and safety rules. Standard operating procedures are SOPs. The establishment of written standard operating procedures is necessary to alert everyone of the potential hazards associated with various locations within a facility. Training. Everyone working in a hazardous area must recognize and understand the potential health and safety hazards involved in their work assignments. Training is required, and documentation of that training is mandatory. The medical surveillance program includes appropriate medical examinations as required, such as when personnel are required to wear respirators for more than 30 days a year. Other requirements include monitoring of the air for potential overexposure to toxic chemicals, vapors, and other hazards. Medical baseline exams, annual examinations, specific exams based upon exposures, termination exams, and of course, maintaining these records for 30 years. There are other on-site safety considerations, so let's review the basics of confined spaces. A confined space is defined as a space which must meet each of the following characteristics. 1. It must be large enough and so configured that a worker can bodily enter and perform work. 2. It must have limited or restricted means for entry or exit. 3. The space is not designed for continuous worker occupancy. A confined space is further divided into two categories: permit required and non-permit required. A permit-required confined space is a confined space that is hazardous to enter unless special precautions are taken. A non-permit-required confined space is a confined space that does not actually or potentially contain hazards that could cause death or serious physical harm. What are some of the physical hazards you might find in a confined space? The atmosphere in a confined space may be extremely hazardous because of the lack of natural air movement. This characteristic of confined space can result in oxygen-deficient atmospheres, flammable atmospheres, and/or toxic atmospheres. Oxygen deficiency is the leading cause of death in confined space. When you don't have enough oxygen to breathe, you can quickly become unconscious. In the last 10 years, 60% of confined space fatalities involved personnel attempting rescue. They weren't prepared for oxygen deficiency. Okay, let's review some of the specific hazards you might find or is created by a confined space. 1. Less than 19.5% oxygen. 2. Flammables, combustibles, explosive atmospheres present, generated or introduced into the area. Some materials inside a confined space can decay or oxidize and give off harmful vapors. 3. Toxic atmospheres present or able to enter the area. 4. There may be areas that are not protected against entry of a variety of substances that could possibly trap, suffocate, or harm a person. 5. Poor ventilation. 6. Obstructions restricting entry for rescue purposes. 7. Physical hazards inside the confined space. You'll need specific training on confined space, but a basic checklist will help you understand the requirements for entering and working in a confined space. First, you must have medical surveillance, the actual permit, if one is required, labeling and posting requirements, atmospheric testing before entering the confined space, and preparation. Preparation includes all the materials, supplies, and equipment necessary for safely entering the confined space. Safety equipment that's required, such as respiratory protection, rescue apparatus, and other necessary equipment. Proper written procedures that everyone understands. These written procedures explain step by step the complete procedure for entering, working in, communicating with people outside the confined space, and rescue procedures. Of course, proper training in these procedures, the equipment, potential hazards, and other requirements is extremely important. Last but not least is record keeping. This includes all documentation of training, medical records, atmosphere testing, and everything associated with confined space entry, including the emergency plan. On-site safety considerations are very important to the project and to you. Remember when we stated that most accidents and injuries were the result of unsafe acts? That doesn't mean that people try to have accidents or that they don't care. Generally, it means that diligent, hard-working employees were trying their best to get the job done, and perhaps didn't pay attention to a safety rule, or they tried to take a shortcut, or they were so involved in the work that they just didn't take the time for safety. It's important to recognize potential hazards and do your best to avoid the hazard. The best prevention is making sure you follow the rules and procedures, you wear proper personal protective equipment when it's required, and that you are aware of what you're doing and what others around you are doing. Safety awareness and following proper safety rules will go a long way in preventing accidents and injuries. Thank you.